All right, so we're back, and we just talked about assignment 7. It's COMP123, week 12, lesson 12, part 5 of our little series, right? And let's talk about this next piece. Yesterday we left off, I'm just going to bring up the PowerPoint. Hopefully it'll take me back in there. I called it UI supplemental because it's not part of your book, right? Not exactly. And the reason why is because there's some piece parts to it that I want you guys to know. And some pieces I'm covering are going to be recovered in programming 3, right? They're going to be covered again, that's what I mean. Some parts you'll see from me, and it's a little different than what you're going to learn. But that's okay. It's good to kind of learn different things from different professors, take what you can, and move on. All right, so let's start up a new project here. I'm going to do a new project. It's going to be another Windows Form application. We're going to call this COMP123, and it's going to be called a lesson 12, part 2, because yesterday was part 1. Maybe we should start calling these things day 1, day 2. I don't know. Anyways, maybe I'll do that for next semester. Who knows? All right, so I'm starting off a new project. Of course, what does that mean? I'm going to just pin the Solution Explorer here for a second, right? And I'm going to go into GitHub so you guys can follow along with GitHub. And I'm going to go into a new repository. I'm going to call this COMP123 lesson 12 part 2. And we're going to create a repository. I'm going to grab the URI. You guys should be kind of sick of this. I'm doing it over and over again, but it's good training for you guys, right? Because you're going to see it in other courses I do with you, if you have me. Created base Visual Studio C# forms project. It's my first commit. And I'm going to go down sync commits, put this in there and publish. And everything goes well, we've got a new repository. By the way, some people asked will I be keeping my videos and all this stuff going for next semester? And the answer is until I have programming 2 again, I'm not going to wipe anything away. GitHub might be cleaned up though, so you may find that some of the stuff on GitHub gets removed after this semester, right? So I may not have all my repositories because I got to clean up GitHub a little bit. Those people are going to get mad at me. So I've created like hundreds of repositories already. And a lot of it's just for little silly programs to show you how to do stuff, right? But the videos will stay on until I do programming 2 again. That's usually how I do it. So if I do programming 1, programming 2, I won't touch the videos until I do the course again, and I'll wipe the videos away, and it'll be new for that semester. Things that'll change or anything that I'm working on for that semester. So you can certainly look at the videos as long as they're up. They're public anyway. Okay, so we talked about a couple things. Let's redo some things. I'm going to just go in here and rename this form. We're going to call this first form today. So I'm going to go into this thing and go rename. And we're going to call this first form. First form, right? I would say rename is good. I'm also going to go into properties of first form. So I'm going to click on first form here. We'll go a little faster today just because of lack of time and also because we started a little late. And on the bottom where it says text, I'm going to change this to first form for the title bar. So we've got first form and first form. Okay, cool. I'm going to drag and drop here a little button. So I'm going to go to Toolbox. I'm going to pin the tail on the toolbox here. And then drag in my common controls, I'm going to drag in a button. And this button, I'm going to go into the top part and rename this thing next button. So here's next button. And I'm going to also reframe this thing. So I'm going to go back down to here where it says button and change this to next. I'm also going to change the font size of the button to 14, which is normally what I've been doing with you. You might say, why 14? Why do you do that, Tom? Well, I'm trying to get you into the habit of restyling your controls, and you should be doing that if you made your own little application. So I got my next button up here, right? So there's my next button. So what I want to do is when I click on my next button, it's going to take me to the next form. Well, there is no next form. Let's make a new one. So how do I add in a second form to my document? Could you possibly intuit, anybody, how I would add another form to this document? Sorry? Add new form? Well, I could do it. I could right click here on my COMP123 lesson 12 project, right? And I would say add, and then I could go here to new item, right? Which is what I want, right? New item, which is going to open up a dialog box here. And if you notice, there's one that says Windows Form, right? Very, very simple. I'm going to change the name of the form right away instead of renaming it later on to what? So second form would be the thing that I probably want, right? So here's second form. And I'm going to click add. Okay, I got second form in here, and it looks like, it looks like the first form. And if you notice, there's first form. I'm going to save this thing just a second. And here's second form. No problem. Well, I want to copy this button, so I'm going to kind of Control C on it and go to second form and Control V on the form. And look, I have a next button, right? And I'm going to kind of move this down over here. Same button from form number 1, right? Except this next button, if I go into properties, right? It's not called next button anymore because it got copied. Right? Normally it would be, but guess what? It retains the name of the button because I'm in a new form, and each form is a class, right? So it's okay for me to have the same name of a control on the first form and the second form, and it's exactly the same name. The buttons are the same. But guess what? Each form is a class. And each class, because each form is a class, right? You encapsulate the controls that belong to each form. So I can have the same controls on one form and the other form, call the same names, but they belong, or they're controls that belong to that form alone, and they have nothing to do with the previous form. Understood? So when you create a form, it's a container, a class, right? That container contains controls and all the other stuff. It has its own schema, its own designer in the background. If you look at this Solution Explorer now, just to give you a very brief. Here's second form, and here's first form. Just check it out, right? You got a bunch of different forms here. Form designer, first form res, and so on. Second form designer. It's all the same. It's almost like it's copied a whole bunch of other stuff. Okay, on the second form, I want you to rename this button anyway. I don't want to make it third form or whatever. For now, we just do 2 forms. Let's go back to properties. So here's my properties for my button. I want to call this back button because we're going to make it go back and forth, right? Let's do that. Here's my back button, and I'm going to go back down all the way to the text. I'm going to change the text to back, right? So it says back. Very, very simple. Back button, right? First form, next button. So what do I want to do? I want to go, when I click on my first form, this is the first form that comes up, by the way. Hey, by the way, what if you wanted to change the order of the form? So I want second form to come up before first form. How do I do that? Well, remember, we also have this program.cs file that's along with, kind of going along for the ride, eh? So if I look at program.cs, let me double click on that for a second. And if I unpin this one so you guys get a little bit better view, and I kind of scroll up a little bit, if you notice, I have this namespace called COMP123 lesson 12 part 2, which is what my program is called, just like normal. And I have this application enable visual styles. This is what's in our main. We don't normally deal with this main thing right now, right? We don't touch this program.cs file. But if you notice application run, we're telling it to run this first form. And that's how it gets instantiated. It actually creates an anonymous object, right, that it kind of sends into the run method of application, right? That's what it's really doing. So we're telling it to run the first form. If you ever want to change that, just change the name of this from first form to second form, and the second form will come up instead of the first form first. Okay? So right now, let's leave it as is. I just wanted to show you. This is where it starts off. It's in the program.cs file under main. Right? Going back, so we got our first form. I'm going to save my second form. And if you notice, the positions of everything is slightly different. Let's just make it so it's a little bit more stylistic. So if you notice my next button, I'm just going to take this next button and put it so that there's right next on the bottom right-hand corner to these guides. I'll do the same thing to my second form. I need to make a couple changes to first form because I want to make it, like the change we normally make. So I'm going to go to Properties, and I'm going to scroll all the way down to where we go and put in our the form itself. Sorry, our start position for the form is going to be center screen because that's the way I like it. You guys certainly may not, but that's how I like it. You're going to do the same thing for second form. Second form, I'm going to kind of scroll down, and where it says start position, I'm going to make it center screen. Now, if I start this thing off, if I say start, right, what comes up? My first form. But if I click next, nothing happens because I haven't programmed next yet. So let's program that next button so it hides this form and shows the next form. Okay, listen to my words. Hides this form and shows the next form. Huh? Let's try this out. So if I go to first form, double click on the next button, it creates a event handler, right? I'm going to unpin this thing from on this tail from the donkey and take a look at this, right? Here's my next button click. And I want to say this, when my next button click is clicked, my next button is clicked, I want to, this form here, right, which is my form, what's this form called? First form, right? So first form dot, can I do a hide? Is that possible? Right? If I do, I can't do a hide. Can I do a show? No. How about active form? Does that do the same thing? If I go active form, here's active form dot show. I can do that, and I can do active form dot hide. Right? So if I do active form dot hide, that will hide the form when I click the button. Doesn't mean that the form is gone. I'm not closing any forms down. If I close the form out, that's bad, right? Why? Because just like you do programming in iOS and Android, you never close previous screens down. You just hide them, right? It's better on memory management. And remember that this form spawns the next form. So if this form doesn't exist, the next form is being spawned by this form, it would cause a big error, right? So we don't want that in this particular case. So active form hide, and I want to kind of spawn the next form. Well, how do I do that? I have a name for the form, right? Well, what's that form called? It's called second form. Do I have access to that? Of course I do, because it's inside the same namespace. Second form dot show. If I kind of do, try and go to show, hey, how come this is not going, right? How do I activate this other form, right? I'm sorry? Well, no, this is my active form. I can do active form dot hide. Let's try that, just active form dot hide for a second and see what happens. So I'm just get rid of this, kind of save, run, and then let's see what happens when I click the next button. Boom, it goes away. My program, by the way, is still running. If you notice, we're still debugging. Hello, right? I got to be able to make this form show up. So let's say you don't know how to do it. All right. Again, what do we do to show and hide forms? I want to move to the next form, right? Well, we know a couple things, right? We know that I can certainly create some kind of variable, right? On the class level. Here's my class, right? And my class is called first form, right? I could certainly create a variable that's in my class called something like next form, right? So let's do that. So we know that my second form, right? So it's called second form, is actually an item, right? And I want to create a variable or a reference to my next form. So I'm going to call it next form with a capital N, next form. I could do that, right? Now, does that cover it? That just makes a variable that's next form, right? So if I go here and I go next form, here it is, dot show, I could do that, the show, I could do that, but will this be enough to show my next form? We're just making a reference here. I haven't created a next form yet. Next form hasn't been created yet, right? But let's try it, see if this cakes out, right? Because I believe it's going to not work. Let's see. So here I am in first form, I go next, and then she be gone, right? And I get this big error saying, hold on, Tom, what's going on here? I don't know what the hell next form is, right? Because we haven't instantiated an object of next form. This is going back to classes, right? In order for my next form to be working, I've got to make it like this. Second form is next form. Next form would be the variable that we're creating is equal to new second form, right? Because we're creating this new form, right? Now, with this statement here, I'm going to stop debugging, right? And rerun everything, right? And let's see now, if I create next, hey, my next form opens up, huh? Now what about back? Back's not working, eh? I got to go back to my previous form, right? How do I do that? Well, there's a couple ways we could do this kind of thing, right? We know second form has been enacted, and there's a couple of tricky ways to do that. Let me go back to Solution Explorer for a second. I'm going to stop this funky thing here. And I'm going to go back to Solution Explorer because there's some tricky things we can do, right? Tricky, tricky, tricky. Tricky, tricky, right? Tricky, right? Well, we've instantiated this silly form here, right? Second form is next form, blah, 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 right? What if, I'm just saying, right? What if we're looking at the program.cs file here, right? We've got this new first form that we've got in here. It's an anonymous form that we're kicking off, right here. What if, right, we didn't make it an anonymous form at all? How do I do that, this first form, right, as an example? How do I do that and pass the information from one class to the other? Do you guys remember how to do that? How do I do that in this static class? Could I do it here? Just like, come on, back to console applications, guys. I have to make an object that's going to be passed on as a global object to the namespace. How do I do it? Well, I'm calling it in here, main, right? But it doesn't mean that up here in my program level, right? Because my program class is right now a static class. I could create a static, kind of static form, right? That I pass on that all of the forms inside my program have access to. Let's try that out, see if it fails, right? So here's my stat thread, I'll leave that alone. And I'm going to, underneath my stat thread, down here, all right, and it says, class system stat thread indicates that the COM threading model for an application is single threaded apartment. Whatever, leave it alone. But if I made a static object, right, and I called this static object, instead of first form, I'll say, kind of parent form, we'll call it whatever you like, right? And it's going to be of type form. So, and instead of just form, it can't be just form, it's got to be first form, right? Static first form, and I want to make this static first form we'll call this parent form. I don't know if I can do that because parent form might be it's not, thank God. Parent form, right? Okay. And what if I made this equal to new first form, right? Here. Can I do that? It's a static object, right? And now in here, inside where it says new first form, because it's an anonymous object, I don't want an anonymous object in here. I want to send in my first form object in here, which is called parent form. I'm just calling it parent form. Hey, will that work? Let's see. So I'm going to kind of see what I'm doing here. We've created another static object, right, called first form, and I'm passing it off. Static means that it doesn't have to be instantiated, right? It's an object that is just created. It's there for me. And here's parent form. I'm passing it into the application run method, which means the first form, and forget my naming, but the first form that gets instantiated, not first form, but the first form, the primary form, if you will, right? And maybe instead of parent form, let's rename this. I'm going to go refactor, rename. I'll call this primary form, just so we know which one is the first one, right? So I'm going to call this primary form. Here it is. And primary form is the one that's going to run first. Okay, so if I've got this correct, just saying, then I should be able to run my application, right? And it says, whoa, there's build errors. Okay, what are the build errors? It says attribute stat thread is not valid on this declaration type. It is only valid on the method declaration. Why? Because whenever you see this square right here, it belongs, I'm just going to kind of cut it out for a second, Control X, it's got to be right over the area that it was, because I moved my stat thread, right? It's got to be like this. Actually, what it does is it's a symbol, if you will, right? It's a decorator, that's what we call it. And what it does is it kind of applies to this. So stat thread applies to the main. So that's why it has to be kind of paired together. Don't worry about that right now. Just take it for my word that that's what the problem is. Let's run it now, see if it works. Okay, it says, whoa, it says, I got a couple issues. An unhandled exception of type system invalid operation accepted, Windows forms.dll, right? And it's pointing down to this set compatible text rendering default to false. So additional set compatible render, blah, 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 may be called before the first Windows object is created in the application, which means I cannot do this. Nice try. It's good thinking that we're trying to make, right? How do I pass on this form, to the other one? Okay, so this is bad, right? We can't pass on my form. I want to go back to my previous form, but I can't do it here in my primary form, right? It looks like I can't declare this static variable, at least not up here, until this is done. That's what it's basically saying. This application set compatible text rendering, and that's why this primary form isn't named. It's an anonymous form. Doesn't mean we can't do it. It just means that the way this works here with a static object, it doesn't like it. So let's undo. Again, you'd be forgiven if you tried this out. So I'm just trying this out ahead of time because some of you may have tried this thing and going, Tom, you know, it doesn't work. I don't understand what this error means. Well, this is what it means. We're trying it out. I'm showing you ahead of time just to be proactive. I'm going to stop recording here for a second and go back, right? And now it's new first form, back to the way it was. Let me just take away the space from stat thread. It's got to be paired up right next to main. Now let's run it. Just make sure that it runs back the way it was, and there we go. We're back to normal again with my back button. If you notice, my text form is not back. Ooh, hey, that's cool. And let's just, if I exit out, if I click my exit button, oh no, look what's happening. My exit button doesn't kill my form anymore. How come? How come? Right? Well, because I have multi-forms in my document. I've got to figure out how to close my form off when I click the X. No. So let's close off this program.cs file because that's not the way to do it, right? Here's my first form, right? Could I, right? If I made this and if I said public, could I add a public access modifier here to my form? I could. For my second form, I could do that. But what if I made a reference to this form as well? If I said public, right, primary form, I'll just do that here. Primary form is equal to first form. Now, I'm making a reference, right? I'm making a reference. Oh, sorry, I made it the wrong way around. First form, primary form. Here, is this good enough, right? Instead of, I'm making a reference to, you know, this form, but I have to complete it. I have to say primary form is equal to, you know, active form, right? Because that's important. I can't just say it's of type first form, and it says, hey, oh man, what? How about this? Can I kind of say this? Is that okay? Right? Doesn't work either, right? Keyword this is not available for the current context because I'm up here, right? I'm inside my class, and it's a partial class. How do I make a reference to this form, this first form, right? Well, we need to make some kind of reference. I got to make it so that my primary form somehow equals my first form, right? And again, I could do it in many ways. I could do it here, down into activeForm.hide. Before my activeForm.hide happens, if I say something like this, if I go, you know, first form, I'm making a reference, right, which is primary form. Primary form is equal to somehow an active form, right? And again, I had an error up there, right? And it says, what's the error? Cannot implicitly convert type system Windows forms form to blah 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 blah, right? Well, it doesn't matter. If I said I can't convert, which means I got to cast, I can certainly do something like this, yeah? So I'm casting active form into first form because active form is a form, general form, and I want to cast it. I want to change the shape of the form so it complies with my form. Right? Well, if that's true, just to test this thing out, I'm going to kind of, you know, hide this one for a second and go into primary form and make that hide the form. So I'm going to say primary form.hide, right? Because now I can do that kind of thing. If this works, if I've made it part of the active form, then my primary form.hide would work, right? Let's try that out. We're just experimenting here, right? So, okay, here's my hide, my next button, click. Hey, it works nice, huh? Back, I got a fix now, and that's easy to do because I've hidden my first form, right, by casting it like this. And by the way, I'm going lightning. I'm going to go back and explain myself in a second, right? Just relax. I'm going fast because we got to get this part back, right? Okay, cool. So I'm going to kind of primary form.hide, right? And when I go back, I want to go to my second form. Here's my second form. I'm going to double click on my back button on my second form here, right? Oh, wait, I have to stop recording to do that, right? Double click on my back button, and in my back button now, do I have access to my primary form? I should. It's private. It's public. So if I go like this, first I want to hide my back button. So here's my this form here, which I call next form. This I've already got a name for this thing. Hold on. Where's my next form, man? I have access to it over here. I named it in here. Here's my first form. I called it, second form. That's why. Man, what's wrong with me, Tom? Today's an early day for me, huh? Maybe do I have access to second form in here? Let's try the second form. Whoa, second form. Second form dot close. Oh man, I can't do that in here. I could do active form dot close, right? Because this is active form. Second form. Well, what did I call my second form here? I named it, didn't I? Next form. Well, how come it's not showing up here, right? I'm in my namespace. So next form. What's going on? Guys, I'm worried, right? Do I even have access to what I'm going to call my primary form? Primary form. I don't know. What's going on here, man? This is bad, right? I got my namespace. It's in the same namespace. I'm trying to access my primary form. Do I have to do this again? How do I go back? I want you to look it up. How do I go between two forms? I want to go back, show previous form, and I want to hide the next form. How do I do that? Look it up in MSDN, please. It's kind of a simple solution here, right? I've shown you part of the solution already. Can at least see if someone can find it before I do. So I have my primary form is good. I can name it here. Made it public. Here's my public. Here's my public class. But somehow I can't see it in my second form. It's part of the same namespace. I don't understand, right? First form, primary form, next form. Well, how do I? Well, hold on. I know why, right? My second form doesn't exist. Here's my second form, right? It doesn't exist before my primary form is functional. This I can make this whatever I want, right? But my second form will not know about my primary form because it doesn't exist until I create it right here. She be problems. Huh? This is bad. So I got to make it so that this public first form thing, right, is available. You know, somehow either I have to pass it in here. Does second form take a parameter? Can I pass a parameter into second form? You know, I have a reference. I've got a constructor in here. Could I pass something into my second form? Is it possible? Right? Well, I have a first form constructor that takes 0 arguments. Right? Here's my class. How do I pass it in? Look it up, guys. Let's see if there's another solution. I want you to find it and understand, because you have to do this for your final your final assignment. So first form, no problem. I can go, I can hide it, I can create it, I can activate it, but it doesn't exist because my second form gets created here, right? In this context, right? It's not created on my next button click. It's created up here. It's already created, right? And even if I make my public first form, my second form doesn't know anything about it. Because I'm creating my second form here in this context. It's not in the global namespace. It's happening within my form, and I'm creating it. It's being instantiated here in my public class, right? So I have access to something like next form right here, right? But not anywhere else. Hey, here's a question. Is my access modifier correct? Could there be something else I could be using here, right? That allows me to, instead of going so that my second form is available somewhere else, right? My first form and second form, these two things. Is there another kind of access modifier? That's another trick we can find. So that's available somewhere else, these two things. Here's another question. What if I went to my program.cs file? Here's my program.cs file. Can I access, because my forms are creating their own, could I access these public variables here, right? So if I go, you know, next form, if I say type next form in here, is that available here? Well, the answer is no, right? Why is next form not available? Why is primary form not available? How come all these variables, these objects aren't available here, even though they're public? Well, I know that there's a couple of modifiers to give you some hints, right? So first of all, let's just take away the primary thing away. And just to make sure there's no errors. If I go back to first form and I look at public, what kind of modifiers are there? There's public, private, and protected, yeah? Those are the main ones. There's also other ones. But let's just look at protected for a second. If I change my second form, right, to protected, What does it mean that when it's protected? It means that it's available to this form and any other subforms, right? Like subforms is in subclasses. Same thing with this. If I say protected as an access modifier here, that's available to this form, and it's kind of a more limited namespace or limited access compared to public. Public should be available to my entire namespace, theoretically, right? Whenever my first form is created, these two objects are created as well. Interesting, interesting. Okay. I know that I can access next form if it's if I have them as objects in regular classes, I should be able to do something like this. I should be able to say something like this dot, and if I go primary form, right, that's available now because it's an object, right? Now I'm leaving it as protected for a second. I'm going to go back to second form. Do I see inside this context? Can I see next form inside this context now if I type next form? And the answer is no, right? I don't have access to it yet. Okay. Well, remember that my second form is generated, my second form object has been generated by my first form. So here's my first form. It creates my second form right here. This is where I actually instantiate my first form. Okay, so protected and public, I mean public is the best one, so I'm going to change this back because that's not it. Anyone have a solution yet? If you guys are looking it up on MSDN. Come on, guys. Somebody look it up on MSDN for me, so I don't have to do it for you. Okay, second form and first form. And if it's not on MSDN, look it up on one of the other sites that tell us some answers. All right, so here's my primary form. I'm hiding it. I can do this, no problem. And if I go back to make it work, if I go to the back button here and I say back, I definitely want to active form. If I don't have active form dot hide, I should be able to do this, no problem. If I hide my form, and I want to do my previous form dot show, and there is no parent. I can't just say parent, right? Whoa, there is a parent form. Whoa, there's a parent form, right? Parent form dot, but parent form means something else. There is no parent form for this one. This is a child form. I haven't made this one a child form. Yes?
In this one, they create an object of the opposite form under the button click of each form.
Okay, I like your thinking. So I go back here. So instead of doing it where I did it, which is up here,
you do it in the button first.
I do it in the button. Here's my first form, right? And my first form is, or my primary form, I made a reference to my primary form here just to do this, right? That's okay. But this object here, and maybe this, right? These two things, I want to take this stuff, well, I'll leave my primary form the way it is. So if I make my object here, so I'm going to go kind of Control X out of here and put it in here, right? But I don't want to do this up here. I want to take my public, I want to make a reference to my form, leave the reference up there, right? Public, second form, next form. I want to leave the reference at the public level, but I want to say next form, or I could also simply put it like this dot next form, right? Because I could use the next keyword for sure. Because this means this, the one I've just established here, just to kind of use the this keyword, right? This dot primary form hide. I could do all that stuff. This dot next form show. All right, so I do that in here in the button click. So you're saying inside the button click, when I do this, right, then I should have access to it?
Yes.
Let's see. So if that's true, if I go to my second form now, and I go to primary form, I should have, oh man, how about up here, right? In my second form constructor, do I have access to it here? Next form, no. How about primary form? Nope, it's not there. I don't see it as something that works there. Let's save everything. So, because I should have access to it from what you're saying, right? Next form. I like your thinking though. That might be the right thing to do. So I create my object. Let's just kill this thing here for a second. I create my object here in the click, right? For the first time, here's my object. But that means that every time I click my next button, I create a new form, right? That's what that means. So if I go back and click it again, there's a brand new next form that gets created, right? So I like your thinking, but that's not the answer. So I'm going to kind of X out of here and put it back to where it was. Anyone else have a solution? This is a problem in when it comes to our classes and thinking how classes and objects work. This goes back to what we were doing before, right? So remember that this is in the same namespace. I'm still in this COMP123 lesson 12 part 2 namespace, right? And inside here I've got these two objects here, right? How about could I create some kind of, because these are objects and I'm creating a new object of first form, but the problem is back in program.cs, right? Here's my program.cs. I don't have any reference to this new first form object, right? I don't have a reference to it here at all, right? In this namespace, I got my main method, right? And in my main method, I've got my program, and it seems like I can't declare anything up here, right? Before stat thread, right? Let me just see if I can create any kind of objects. If I go like, I'm going to make it int a number, my number. Let's try to do this over here. My number is equal to 0. And let's see if I can do that before I do this, right, in my program. Start that off. Oh, no, it doesn't allow me to, because if I go no, it gives me that same error again. It says, can't do that static member of the class. So if I go static, can't do that. And if I run it again, it gives me the same error. Oh, wait a minute, it doesn't give me the same error this time. I made a static int, my number, and I put it up here before everything else. This time it worked, it ran, look. Right, no, I can go back, but my back button doesn't do anything. So I made an object up here, and I made it a number, an integer, that accepted it. Huh? Tell me.
Well, the one I found, they used, in the first form, they made second form, and they used they made the second form, next form equals new second form in the next button click.
Yeah.
And then they did next form dot owner equals this.
Oh.
And then, so instead of.
So then I can go to parent, right, or whatever it is, or I can use another form.
The second form, you go this dot owner show, and it'll show the first form.
Because the first form is I've set the owner property, right, which is something different. That's definitely a way to do it. I like that. But follow me here for a second. Let's say I'm going to go back to hold your thought, because I want to go back there and show that solution, right? So here I am in program.cs. I'm able to do this up here, but I wasn't able to make it a form. Well, let's try that out. So if I do up here, I go static int. Instead of static int, I go static first form. I'll stop recording. Sorry, debugging, whatever you want to call it. Static first form, right? And I want to do the same thing I did before. And I want to call this primary form. Primary form is equal to new first form. If I do that, right, let's just leave it like that for a second, right? So I got another first form hanging out. I haven't made anything yet. And now I run the same thing. I haven't passed anything in there yet. Will it still run? No, it will not. Any kind of reference to a form, because I haven't done this set compatible text rendering default to false. Once I get to there, as an example, I have an issue if I instantiate any object that's up here before this runs. So I got a problem. Okay, what if I just did one of these? If I just made a reference like this, can I do that? And I'm going to say save and run it. So I haven't actually instantiated a form. Oh, it runs. So primary form does work up here as something that I could use. Cool, cool. What if I did something like this? So after this was done, I went down here and went something like this. Primary form, right, is equal to new first form, right? Like right here. Could I do that down here, right? So here's my primary form, which is just a reference. It just takes the shape of my first form. And, I want to make it so that I can do primary form is equal to new form down here. Let's run it. Runs, right? That's cool. Let's try this out now. If I can do this, then theoretically, then I should just be able to replace this with primary form, right? Primary form. Let's try and make that run, right? Okay, that looks like it runs nice. So that means if I go back into my first form, if I go into this idea that I'm doing, right? This dot primary form and primary form are two different things, theoretically, right? So let's get rid of primary form for a second. Actually, I'll just comment it out. And instead of this dot primary form dot hide, I'll comment those two things out as well, right? Because these are just experiments we're making, trying to figure this all out, right? And I want to say, well, primary form is thing. Well, how come I don't have access to it? Primary form, static object that belongs to my main. It's my main class. It should be there, right? Come on, okay. Primary form. Called it primary form. It's in my program.cs file, right? Here's my primary form, right? It's my new form. How come? I'm referring to the object itself. That's why. So I can't do that. I can't do this. Okay, let's go back. That's the solution we're going to use. We're going to use your solution. So I'm going to undo. I'm going to get all this back. It's nice ideas, nice thinking that it would work this way. But we're instantiating new objects, and what we're looking for is to try and access the object itself, right? Can't do that. Can't access the object itself from main because the object hasn't been created yet, right? You'd be forgiven to think that that's possible. So we can leave this in here, no problem, because it's just it's a friendly name for active form. That's what we're doing here, just to make sure that this is okay. So what we want to do is, before we do nextForm.show, we want to create, after we've instantiated the form, which is up here, see up here? I could do it in here, but it doesn't matter. It's been instantiated. So let's do this. NextForm.owner, right, is equal to this. Can't do this in this if I go this in this context, right? Well, this, what does this have a meaning? It says, if I hover over it, says part 2 first form. That's what this means. I could also make it, what if I did this, if I said primary form? This dot primary form. Could I do this as well? Could do that, right? It's pretty cool. So before I instantiate the form, so the form is instantiated, here it is right here, and before I show the next form, I've set my owner to this, right? Now let's go back. If I go back to first form, by the way, do I need this second form? I do, because I'm using it in here. I don't need to do this. You can do it a different way. I'm making it happen like this. And this is, of course, by the way, it'd be this dot next form. That's the proper way to do things, right? From a form, I don't need this anymore because I'm not going to use this anymore. I'm going to give you the code for a second. Here's my first form. I'm going to save this thing. I'm going to go to my program.cs, close this off, and get rid of all this crap because this is all wrong, right? I go new first form. That was the original way it was. Get rid of all this. Just fix. I'm going to just go back to the way it was. I'm going to share this stuff on GitHub in a second, so that way people aren't catching up. They can certainly look at this into my experiments, right? This is key, right? Okay, so I'm back to the way it was. Yeah. Let me run it the way it is. Make sure that it's cool. Runs, no problem. I'm going to kind of X out of there. And let's go back to second form for a second. So second form should have access now to the owner, right? So when I go back button, I want to say, could I say this dot owner? I could, right? This dot owner dot show, which is what I want to do. But I want to do this dot owner dot show after I hide my form. So I can hide this form. This dot, I could say something like this dot. If I go this dot hide, I could do that too. Right? But I like to create an object which is just my own way of doing things. You don't have to. I'm not going to dock you marks for doing it any other way. You could use the this keyword, but I like to create a form of my own. So I'm going to say the form I'm currently on, I'm going to call it next form. I'm going to call it public just for now. Oop, button press. Second form, right? This is how you do it. Second form, I'm going to call this next form, right? Which is this form here that we're talking about right here. Next form is equal to, that's the first thing I want to do, just kind of create an object here. And I'm going to say down here, just like we did before, right? next form, right? Next form is equal to next form, or sorry, it's called second form, active form. Because what is this doing again? I'm making a reference. It's basically this. That's all I'm saying. It's this is next form. I could also do, if I say next form is equal to this, that would suffice too. But leave it this way for a second. If I go this dot next form now, this dot next form, that would be the proper way to do that. So this dot next form is this, right? So I want to say, before I show the other one, I want to hide this new one. So this dot next form dot hide, right? And I want to show the next one. Okay, this goes back to classes, all right? A little bit. We want to go back to classes, and the reason for that is we want to go back and forth between these two forms. Let's see if it works now. Okay, so I'm going to kind of try this out. So here's my first form. Put it up here. Next, back, next, back, next, back. Oh, cool, cool, cool. Okay, but what if on my second form I want to close off my app and I click the close button? What happens? It doesn't close off my app, does it? How come? How come? How come? I got to close it off somehow. And we're going to figure that out in the next movie. So I'm going to go back.